Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11, and of course we're playing as Germany. If you didn't already all know that, I guess I need to state it. There's got to be a few people out there who are just clicking around and what's this? And might like to know. They might know that it's some of that, but without all of it. Now I'm getting somewhat organized, somewhat ready for my invasion. Ah, well here we are, the Vienna Diktat. We were just second the Vienna awards wondering about that. Why it hadn't fired before, but now it has, so we're going to force Romanian acceptance. Still don't know now that these guys are in the Axis if we're going to have trouble getting Bulgaria in. Okay, yes, the Heimwehr Danzig disbands. We're back to very high popularity. Active sonar. Okay, that's grayed out, I'm sure. Light infantry branch, that was also grayed out. Okay, German-Portuguese trade agreement, June 3rd, pro-access, but walking a fine line between the Germany needs. Tungsten for machine tools, good. This we can decide not to do, but we are going to spend the money. We want the rare materials. Ah, and we were talking last event about Baltic Volk-Deutsch. And again, I was sort of talking to Revolverheld, who's made an event about Lithuania. And here, this is, again, I'm not disagreeing or disbelieving. I want to be very clear. Revolverheld's talk about the 40,000 Volk-Deutsch from Lithuania. I totally believe it. I totally think he's right. Where, one, I was criticizing, and yes, that's what I was doing, criticizing when the event was firing. I may be wrong about when the event should fire, meaning I think it should fire after Soviet taking of the Baltic states, but, actually doing it in-game as opposed to just on the year date. But maybe it did happen beforehand. So again, I could be wrong, but like I say, I don't think I am. And I was asking for a source. Now the source is not because I don't trust Revolverheld. Again, I trust him, and I believe he's correct. What I sort of, to a point, want to have a bit of a source, and although I'm not citing lots of sources here in a sense of, well, according to X book, or according to X author, or whatever. And I'm not citing this here. But because I hadn't heard that, sort of kind of an idea of sort of what is, what's happening. And it just sort of like when you're writing a book, because there's a, shall we say, it's Rommel is commands the 7th Panzer Division during the invasion of France. That is sort of with for most people who read history and know history somewhat well about the invasion of France. You just sort of know that it's a sort of a commonly understood fact and evidence. Like, well, Germany occupies Poland, that's commonly known, even more than Rommel commanding the 7th Panzer Division. So you don't need to cite your sources. Well, what proof do you have that Germany occupies Paris, in 1940? We all know it. But this is sort of what I do to cite my sources here, is I often do it graphically. This is a period map from a period book, and you can something transport der Balten Deutschen Volksgruppe or whatever. I'm probably reading some of that wrong. But that is a map that was made during the period by the Germans, talking about showing that, you know, the different sort of paths, that some were coming right, you know, out right down into Memel, and some were coming down into here and being settled into former Polish territories, and some were coming into Seton here. So I am citing my source graphically, this map, and I'm also citing my source here. This is an actual SS, what is it, RSHA or something, officer, not a Waffen SS, but one of the other guys. And again, this is one of the other guys. They are wearing gray by this time in 39, because this is happening in 39. This is one of the guys, is part of the Race and Resettlement Office. I think I have all that, the initials, and I may be transposing something, but settling Volksdeutsch in one of, you know, photo of going through, you know, people lined up at the table or whatever. And this I got from sort of a uniform collector's site photo, but that's what he's doing at least at some period during this time, settling people, German speaking people, into empty Polish villages that they've removed the Poles from. They were ethnically cleansing, to use a more modern term. And this is different. They weren't necessarily like putting them in camps. It's just like, oh yeah, you people here who aren't German, you know, leave, you know, just go. Maybe pack up what you can sort of carry in a suitcase, but go. And not that they necessarily didn't provide them a train or a wagon or whatever and then drop them off somewhere else and say, oh, well, you're farming this area now. But they weren't being put into camps like the Jews or others were. They were just simply clearing people out. So that's sort of my evidence, is a photo of it happening and a period graphic of it happening. You know, talking about it happening. So that's mine. Again, this is sort of one of the reasons I avoid some dates here, is because this is happening in 40. Obviously, historically, it happened in 39 because they invaded Poland earlier, but we're sort of just doing this. So we gained some manpower. Now, instead of, which is just fine and good, he gave us, I think it was 7 manpower directly. We're increasing the manpower in a few of these states. So it's, maybe slightly OP, overpowered, but into there, which we will gain a little bit more ongoing manpower coming in. Okay, creation of the 9th Army, yes. Ethnic Germans from Eastern Poland repatriated. In accordance with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the German Reich organized repatriation of about 130,000 ethnic Germans from Eastern Poland to Germany. And again, I'm completely believing this. I hadn't heard of this before. And again, I don't disbelieve it at all. This is just something I hadn't heard of, and so that is good. Lose descent. We're already at 0. Gain some manpower. And in accordance with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact agreement of Germans Reichs representing from Estonia to Germany. Now, if anything, this may be equivalent of a double event, because obviously I've just had the Volksdeutsch coming out of Estonia and Latvia, but there was a second wave, and this is maybe what this is referring to. And so again, I'm taking, because this is a much smaller number, because I had 60,000 in the previous, and I don't know if that 60,000 is in total or the first wave, because like I say, there was a first sort of like, hey, volunteers, come on out, come to Germany kind of thing. We'll give you money, and it was sort of set up with the Estonian and Latvian governments, and it was done. The second one, if I'm remembering all this correctly, was after the Soviet occupation. They allowed in Nazi officials. Again, I don't know who the Nazi officials were, whether they were German Diplomatic Corps, SS, or somebody, but they allowed Nazis to show up and basically organize up the Germans, and that more or less you were leaving. I'm not saying there was zero choice, but it was somewhere between, hey, we're the Soviets and we're in charge now, and these German officials here want to take you back to Germany. You better pack up and leave because, hey, we're here and we're in charge now. It doesn't necessarily mean that, I don't know, you'd be arrested if you didn't go or whatever, but you weren't necessarily going to keep your farm. You weren't necessarily going to keep your property or, or whatever, because we're the Soviets and we're here now. And so that second wave coming out of the Baltic states once the Soviets got in power was not compensated, so some more manpower, but that definitely happens. Okay, Nordic kings confer in Stockholm. This is interesting. Kings of Denmark and Iceland, of Norway, and of Sweden, along with the President of the Republic of Finland, got together in a meeting in Stockholm on the 19th of October. Reportedly, there was, optimism concerning the outcome of the Soviet-Finnish talks. The relations between the Soviet Union and Finland were discussed at the conference, and the Finnish cabinet postponed drafting a reply to Moscow until the talks would be over. Unfortunately, the noble participants could only render moral support for the threatened Finnish president. The Swedish Prime Minister, the only Nordic country with a sizable military potential, rejected any military involvement of Sweden in the case of a Soviet attack, mainly because he assumed that the necessary domestic political support would be lacking. Okay. We need to watch this. It proves relations good. Shelling of Manila. Manila. On November 26, 1938, an incident was reported near the Soviet village of... Oh, I was thinking Manila as in the Philippines. I'm not the best speller, guys. There's multiple reasons for that, but I'm just looking to see. Okay, there's an extra I in this compared to this Manila. Okay. So, a little different. Okay. On November 1939, an incident was reported near the Soviet village of Mainila, or Mainila, whatever. Close to the border with Finland, the Soviet border guard post had been shelled by an unknown party, resulting, according to the Soviet reports, in the death of 4 and injuries of 9 border guards. So this is another sort of Operation Himmler type thing. The Finns started it all. The Finns are the ones responsible for us having to invade them. Okay. Research conducted by several Finnish and Russian historians later concluded that the shelling was a false flag operation carried out by the NKVD unit with the purpose of providing the Soviet Union with a casus belli and a pretext to withdraw from the non-aggression pact. Poland claimed the incident. Okay, yep. So you can read a little bit more about it. So we were watching this. Relations are going downhill. Okay, ALCAT is how I know that abbreviation. Was a major manufacturer of armored vehicles for the Wehrmacht during World War II. The main factory was located in Berlin, Borstwickwalde, on the whatever, and wherever performed as designer, manufacturer, and partly exclusive licensee of some of the main armored fighting vehicles of the Wehrmacht. At its peak, 20 to 30 armored fighting vehicles were produced every day between 3,000 and 4,000 workers. Yeah, 10 to 20 armored fighting vehicles every day, where a U.S. factory might be doing 100 vehicles a day or more. And it's I would say it's mostly down to the slowness of production is mostly down to a style of manufacture, meaning how things work within the factories. Germans were just damned inefficient at putting things together. The second element is the complexity of the design of the vehicles, as well as the quality. The complexity meaning they were complex, and the quality often very high. So those two things make production time longer, but it's just the way, because I'm looking at all these tanks, all these Sturmgeschütze lined up here. Why are you lining Sturmgeschütze up here? That you have the rear engine compartments open, and these are road wheels there, which are maybe taken off of the back. But why are you lining them up here, facing this thing? And why are you swinging one above the rest? Now, you're swinging the one above the rest because of one of two things, and they both may be true. One is either it's incapable of driving at the moment, meaning there's no gas in the engine, or there's no engine, or it's not all hooked up, or it's not ready to drive, or it's in such a place that to need to move it, to drive it somewhere, it's in the way, it's blocked, so you can swing it over there. Why not line all of these guys up front to back and put them on something that rolls along, and they get assembled in automotive an American automotive factory style, as they roll along from place to place to place. And the guy that this is just the construction design of the not of the tank, but of the factory. It's just Germans are just at this time are just not efficient. If Americans were building these tanks, or Sturmgeschütze, yes, I know the difference. I know you know that, but we're building these and building the exact same model with the exact same thing. They would have set it up to be at least twice, and not just off the top of my head, or more efficient than the Germans. They would have been producing them faster, more efficiently, not necessarily with any more workers per tank, or per vehicle, or whatever it is. They rolled along the things. It would just have happened faster, quicker. And now there may be another reason why there's slower production. And this is something that, to really understand what's going on, you sort of need to take into account, is this. The Germans, if they had ramped up their production speed, say, oh, well, we're going to build not just out of one factory, but all factories. Instead of 20 a day, we're going to build 40 a day. We're going to build 40 a day everywhere. And we're going to do that with aircraft. We're going to do that with submarines, which are, well, let's stay away from submarines, because those are has some of the same things. Because, say, putting together the engine, it could roll down a factory line. But once you're putting it into a U-boat, and they're big engines, you got to sort of, you can't easily roll the submarine down a factory line. It's you sort of assemble it in one place. But some of the techniques. But let's just say aircraft and tanks and trucks and whatever. If we were to double the number of output, Germany didn't have the steel. Germany did not have the steel to double the number of tanks and aircraft and trucks and half-tracks. If they doubled the number of production, Germany just didn't have the steel. So maybe I'm wrong at criticizing. I don't think I am, because I think they had the steel to build more and quicker and get some of the stuff out there. And they could have expanded some of the steel production as well, both and I don't know the details. And some of the details are some of the factories or steel building plants are destroyed or disrupted from bombing. So, there's some of that. But I don't know, even like, say, at this time in 1940 or whatever, there's no real bombing campaigns going on of any significant amounts against industry, because it's just only sort of starting after really after the Battle of France, the bombing campaigns. I don't know where the main bottlenecks were, whether that was on steel production or on iron ore mining and getting out, or what. But I would presume, even within Germany, you could put more people into getting more iron ore out of the earth. And I would presume, again, it's a presumption, you could increase steel production. Some of the steel production, like the Swedish, was particularly high grade, which a lot of these parts you don't need high grade steel for. See, like all these road wheels, you don't need high grade steel because they're not armor. Okay, so they don't need to be particularly hard. They're not a hardened armored piercing round going down the barrel, so they don't need to be particularly hard. And they're not engines, which are something that needs to maintain its strength at very high temperatures, meaning as the engine's burning in it. A machine gun barrel, recently reading, you can melt a machine gun barrel pretty easily just by shooting bullets through it. That's why the Germans had quick change barrels, to keep that from happening. But other pieces of the machine gun, the bipod, the barrel shroud that goes on the outside of the actual barrel, and other machined parts of some of these really nice German machine guns don't need to have able to take the high temperatures. When I was in the firearms industry, do various things, I imported a bunch of firearms with somebody else. I mean, that's slightly overstating it, but they're assembling sort of FNFALs. Well, in California, and with the sort of the assault, no, it wasn't California, it was the federal current laws at the time, you couldn't put them together with a flash hider, because that was during the assault weapons ban. Couldn't have a flash hider on it. No, can't have a flash hider. No, okay. So, and these came with flash hiders, the parts kits that I imported. I imported parts kits and got those, and receivers put together versions of sort of L1A ones with FNFAL receivers. They took FNFAL magazines, but the rest were L1A1 parts. Long story, most of you don't care. So I had to take all the flash hiders off of them, which is, they were pinned. They had a little, they screwed on, and then you put in a little donut into it, little metal donut into it, and then you drove a same size pin through it, so it held it on really good. Well, I had to knock that pin out, take the little metal donut out, and then you have the gun there. Well, one company that was bigger and much more successful than me, they just simply started that with just taking a bandsaw and cutting off the threading. They later production, they actually sort of recrowned it. Well, I had none of those really manufacturing techniques, and I didn't want to give somebody just a flat cut-off barrel. If you know anything about it, that really sucks on accuracy without properly recrowning it. And even just taking that little bit of threads off, it was about a third of an inch of threads, changes the whole sight picture of, or the trajectory of the bullets. So even though they're just peep sights, it still messes with them. And I wanted to leave it there. So what I did was, and the hardest part was, it was in Wentworth threading, which is different than metric, and which is different than standard American threading. So I had to get a Wentworth tap. Hard thing to find. And so I got the right size of chromoly steel tubing, and cut it to the right thing, sanded it down so that it was smooth, and tapped it in there, and just threaded it over the barrel threads. And it was just put over there. It extended out past the barrel a little ways, but it was just, there was no holes drilled in it, so it didn't affect the flash, so it wasn't a flash hider. It was an end cap to protect the threads. Basically every gun that I sold. They also bought for extra this flash hider that I had in a plastic bag with a little donut and a little pin that they may have decided to put onto the gun. But I made sure, and I tested the stuff, I made sure I used chromoly steel, which is I don't know exactly, but it's a, steel with, as the name may, with chrome in it, to be able to take high heats. So it was probably actually take higher heats than the flash hider that the British had made to put on the thing. So as you fired that gun, my end cap wasn't going to melt or deform or anything, and it was overdone in that sense. It was just a very simple thing. I mean, I just did it in, sort of, if you will, a nice home workshop type setup, but did it all right, and they would thread on, and at least some of them I put Loctite on them, but you could just take a wrench and pop them off there. But it was mainly just a thread protection, because the threads would have been, easily damaged. But I put on chromoly steel on it, because that's where the flash on the barrel comes out. So when you're doing something like that, you need to do some more high tense, high pressure stuff. Where some other elements that I put onto the gun was just with standard, mild steel or whatever, and had no ability to take extra heat, but it was nowhere near the part of a gun that would have any heat other than, I don't know, sunlight coming on. So some of that sweet, get back to it, Swedish steel, you need it for an engine that gets super hot, whether a tank engine, a truck engine, an aircraft engine, or you need it for the barrel of a gun, or maybe for the projectile coming out of the gun. But you don't need high quality steel because it's also not like a high pressure situation for the wheels, if you will. And maybe you want them well made, but you don't need this high quality steel. So some of the problems Germany had was the high quality steel that it needed for some of the parts, which include rifle barrels, artillery barrels, and all of that stuff, but don't include artillery wheels. So I am sure that at times during the system that you could have increased the current production capacity, and you can always build more steel mills, things that take iron and mix it with carbon at the right heat and create steel. So you can increase that. I know this is getting a bit long, but you can increase that and make more steel. That obviously takes trained personnel, and it takes, including just increasing the mines. Part of it may be more shifts operating down in the mine, but at some point you have to increase the infrastructure around it. But Germany could do that, because Germany, if we're talking especially, because by 36, Hitler is, with the 4-year plan, and they're starting this under Göring, of working Germany's industry towards war. So they are increasing German steel output. So I am sure that there are measures that they could have increased the steel output more than they did. Now, by how much? I don't know. I don't know whether they could have doubled it or just get 5% more. I don't know. But they could do more. And so I believe that, 10 to 20 vehicles were produced a day. That seems pretty low to me. Or Alket, which Alket is a major producer of tanks and other fighting vehicles. So, if you were to double all of the trucks and vehicles, Germany, at what it was historically, did not have enough steel. But it could have done more, one. And two, it very well might have been able to do more quickly when it counted. Obviously, they had enough tanks to defeat France. And they had enough aircraft and tanks to defeat Britain and its colonies, had they focused on it. It's the question, do you have enough tanks to defeat the Soviets and the Americans and the British and whoever else you may convince to fight you? That they obviously didn't. But had you had another 1,000 tanks, another 1,000 aircraft or something at the beginning of Barbarossa, you could have had a different outcome in Barbarossa. And so I look at some of this stuff as German inefficiency in manufacture. I could go into it more, but we need to get on with this. So, level 2 tank factory. Yes, we will take that. Do we still have the metal? Yes. Blockade action underway. Okay, okay, we've successfully blockaded our enemies. Okay, blockade after cut off food. Player's note. This is the part that's why this is here. In an effort not to create pop-up event spam, this is a one-time notification event. You will not receive additional blockade event notifications if you blockade a major port level 8 or above. However, the blockade effect will be enacted on a hostile owner of that port in question. Okay, what that means is they've worked out a way, and I'm not exactly sure how this works, but we go and look at the code. Let's take Gibraltar. If you were to sit, I think it's into this C zone here. You were to sit out here for a while. What it will do is, and this is sort of important, is slowly reduce the port level here. So I don't know what it is now, but it will slowly reduce the port level down. Now, I think it just turns them red, but it may take them fully away. I think it just turns them red as damaged. Which, what it's trying to do is to simulate cutting them off. You can, with submarines, like we are trying to do now, sink all of a nation's transports, and then, if they don't have transports and not send supplies, the Gibraltar garrison will starve. That is, if you cut this off and you cut this off, Malta will eventually go to 0 organization levels, and you'll be able to attack, and they'll just crumble, no matter how good their defenses are and how strong they are. But if they still have, even though you're sinking a lot, if they can still put, and you can't quite cut off through the sea zones, like, you know, cutting off these things, if they can still get supplies in, even though you're sinking theoretically every single supply ship that comes here through the game mechanics, they'll still get supply. They'll continue to get supply so long as there are supply ships and they sort of keep there. Even though they're being sunk, the supplies still get through. But if you lower the port level, and as the port level goes down, the amount of supplies that can get in lowers. Now, I don't know if it will ever go to effectively 0. But what the idea is if, say, the British or Allied or whatever player has a stack of 10 units here, and you move it down to, I don't know, level 1 or 2, a bunch of those units are going to starve because they're not going to get enough supplies, because the port level will be too small by cutting them off. By simply sitting here long enough without moving around, you just got to occupy long enough the sea zone of the port. You occupy it long enough, then the port level goes down over time. So you can do blockade actions, but you have to keep a ship in that port. Now, obviously, say Norway, they have no islands. Well, maybe this is cut off up here. Yeah, this is cut off here. So, and that's for various reasons. So there's no infrastructure through here. So for Norway to get supplies up to here, you need to be able to trace a supply link, or for Germany, say. So if there's no linkage between these things here, the Allies can come and sit off here and sit off here, and even though there's a supply link, theoretically, they can reduce the effective supplies coming through blockade. So that's what this is. If you want to blockade a, one of these islands out here, Bornholm, and you're afraid of its garrison, not that you should be, but if you are, you can starve them out simply by putting a fleet that's hostile, you need to be at war, there long enough, and it will be blockaded. That's my understanding of how the mechanism works. That is an important mechanism. You can do that to a nation and blockade a port. Now, again, on that, if, say, you want to blockade the French ports down here and reduce their, and it will reduce their port levels. My understanding of the game mechanics, the port level, so long as it's port level 1 is in effect, it will send out as much supplies and fuel as you want, or as need. The port level only affects receiving of supplies, not sending them out. I didn't understand that a long time ago until I sort of tested it with some of these kind of situations here. But, did you need to have a big enough port to, like, supply all the German supplies that I was supplying out through the Mediterranean? A 1-level port is enough to send out as much supplies as you want. It doesn't seem to affect anything, but supplies levels are definitely affected on the receiving port end. So having enough ports, or big enough ports, is something. So if you were to, say, blockade the French southern coast here, it doesn't block French, Mediterranean or whatever from getting supplies. Just to sort of keep that in the game mechanic. Okay, we have had active sonar, and now we can do active sonar for ships, which will help us detect subs, and we want to do that even with all the other kinds of things. Oh, and we have a few more points, I guess. We have a lot of stuff we want to do, of course. The supply organization looks good to me. Partially want to start doing this because it's at 12, so that takes a long time to go up. But throughput and whatnot help always allow you in more. Okay, down here we're doing all the ones I want to be doing right now. Yeah, a couple of those we could be doing. Assault concentrate. The 41 techs we could be doing, that would be fine, but supply throughput down because the supplies are sort of being operated internally, but supply transfer costs to get through cheaper everywhere. Coordination. I wish it didn't have the negative effect. I sort of understand their thoughts behind it, but let's do float plane. Okay, yes. I know, lots of talk. But we're getting ready to go. I hope some of that stuff was interesting to all of you. So you sort of have to, you know, to understand, and this is one thing that I've mentally played a lot in my mind, and I've periodically been asked, why am I so interested in Nazi Germany? It's one of those what ifs in great, you know, Napoleon is another what if. Napoleon was on a, you know, a complete winning streak, and he, even though there was the problems with Britain and Spain, Napoleon Empire was nowhere near collapsing until his disastrous invasion of Russia. And he did get that second army together, but basically did sort of lose, and, you know, and Germany couldn't hold that together. So, you know, when Austria and Prussia were peeling away from his continental system and collapsed. But, you know, that Grand Armée, had that not been sent into Moscow to die, it just, you know, less than 10% made it out alive. Napoleonic France, Napoleon could have turned that Grand Armée instead of, because he turned it from getting ready to invade Britain to go after France. He could have just taken a third of that army himself instead of going that way. Because you don't want to move too much in, because you do have starvation problems, and he didn't know about that. That the infrastructure and the supply structure in Spain is terrible, including, you know, at that time. But came in and crushed Wellington. Wellington's a great commander, and Wellington probably would have been smart enough and able to, you know, he moved to the lines of Tierra del Fuertes or whatever across here. You know, maybe hold out there, or, you know, obviously they were holding out in Gibraltar, maybe able to hold out in a few pocket things like this. But Napoleon, and he's smart enough that if he's being faced with too much of a enemy threats, he was a fast thinking commander, and could move in a way fast enough to get out of Napoleon's way. And he had an intelligence system that would have known when the major armies were coming, and he did that in the past. But Napoleon could have crushed the, you know, major armies, not maybe the guerrilla warfare element, but the major armies of resistance in Spain, and held on to his continental system for a long time. And even though with Britain ruling the seas, he could have done that, and so could have had a very different what if turned out in history. There's no what ifs. What if Japan did X different? Could it have won in the Pacific? No, there is no way. Well, what if they would have gotten 100 nuclear weapons? Well, yeah, but their, you know, nuke program was almost basically nothing. And well, what if they got germ warfare that they were trying to get? You know, some, not just chemical warfare, but you know, biological warfare. What if they got their biological warfare working right? Well, okay, maybe if, and they were working towards that. What if they did get a biological warfare working right, and then they were able to launch a major biological attack and killed off all the Americans? You know, yeah, okay. Massive, wacky what ifs aside, I mean, because there has to be something like that. if it isn't, there's no way they're going to win. Now, if Germany wins, and in doing so ties up enough of the American fleets and enough of the American action, that then and then Germany's able to build a fleet and whatever else, Germany may be able to support Japan well enough to keep Japan into the war and fend off the Americans. But there is no do something better, do something quicker. Oh, well, what if they invaded California? And so there was an aircraft production levels pretty high in Los Angeles. They weren't getting beyond the Rockies. It just wasn't going to, in a practical, logistical sense, they would have just encountered, and again, I'm waiting for, and I want to see the next Man in the High Castle series, and I watched it, and it's good. But the authors, now, of course, it's alt history, so maybe it was an alt history in which the Americans didn't have the Second Amendment, so Americans didn't have guns. But Americans had more guns than people. We still have more guns than people to this day. That's why, and I know, and I think Europeans should be allowed to own guns. But that's me, an American, talking. All of you Europeans, left wing, right wing, whatever, you can disagree with me. That's your prerogative. And you can believe you're right, that it's best that most Europeans don't have private ownership of guns. But then, of course, I look at Switzerland, and it doesn't seem to be a problem, the private ownership of guns. Because they have a lot of private ownership of guns in Switzerland. So, but, again, it's your prerogative. There doesn't seem to be any school shootings in Switzerland either. But there is in Norway. Yeah, I don't know. But, so, you can, and I'm sure there'll be some that might agree with me, yeah, having guns would be cool, and some don't. But, of course, the European populace and governments, they get to decide that. And again, I'm not trying to impose American values on you. I'm just, impose them. I can try to influence and suggest, but that's different than imposing. I'm not trying to impose American values. But in America, even with all this anti-gun stuff going on, they're not getting rid of the guns. They're not even going to ban the ARs. It isn't going to happen. The kids all think they're going to get this momentum and it's going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And it isn't the NRA blocking it. The politicians aren't afraid of the NRA. They're afraid of the NRA's voters, and they're also afraid that if they actually start banning these things, one, they're probably going to be losing. Two, there's going to be a lot of really upset rednecks that are going to go out and shoot somebody. And I don't mean a school. I mean, there's a lot of them. So you aren't getting rid of guns in America. It just isn't going to happen. And you're not just going to go down to, single-shot rifles for hunting. No, it isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean there's laws aren't going to be passed at different levels. They are. They're obviously, basically, handguns are hard to, almost impossible to get in the city of Chicago legally. Illegally, they're easy to get, but illegally, they're hard to get. Did I say that right? Legally, they're hard. Illegally, they're easy. But you're not, in America, you're not going to ban it. So Japan trying to march armies through these western states, one, the logistics, the railway levels are very small, and two, the armed American populace was going to come out and shoot Japanese people. Trust me. And the idea that with, like, the Japanese was, when there was a couple of guerrilla attacks in Man in the High Castle, they did this sort of collect a bunch of local Americans and take them outside somewhere publicly and shoot them, firing squad type things. That would only get Americans to bring out their hidden guns. If you did, say, land a Japanese force large enough and take Los Angeles, and they try to collect some guns, and I'm sure they collect some guns, and when the government comes and collects all 5 of your guns, or the Japanese collects all 5 of your guns, okay, fine. They don't know about the other 10 that nobody knew about. Trust me. There are plenty of Americans that have well more than 10 or 20 guns. So the idea that you're going to be collecting the majority of guns is lunatic. Invading. But the American people may go, well, it's better not to shoot Japanese because, hey, America's getting an army together and they're going to come in and kick them out. So let's just, be peaceable for a while. And that I could see that happening. Even the Americans at the time living in California, I can see that happening. And they'll be peaceable for the time. But once you start shooting civilians as a retaliation against some sort of guerrilla attack, whether the guerrilla attack is justified or not, but you start retaliating against it. Oh shit, you just shot my mother, or the lady down the street, or whatever, and I might be next. Hell no. We're going to start taking, sniping shots out at the Japanese invaders. So retaliation shootings that the Japanese did do in China, the Germans did everywhere, would not fly in America. It's just not going to happen, because once you start down that path, government, whoever you may be, the people will get mad and we will start killing you. Even because we will see it as a no-win situation. We're dead if we do, we're dead if we don't, so we might as well shoot you. So that sort of man in the high castle part, I criticize highly. That the Japanese would have very quickly, early in their occupation, would learn, no, we're staying away from that. They might lock people up, they might put them in concentration camps, to, like, hey, well, if you don't behave, we're going to do stuff to you. And so long as there's a, people aren't dying situation, then we're very likely to see a more peaceable population, especially thinking that America, whose industry is all over here, Japan is going to get kicked out. So there is no way a Japanese, if they did something a little better, they're going to win. It just isn't going to happen. Not in, this general historical starting point element. You can go, what if history? Well, what if aliens showed up? Well, yeah, okay, something we can get something extremely what if, and it might happen. But Germany, I really believe there's also another what. Well, what if Hitler did a few things differently? Well, what if he didn't invade the Soviet Union until after he had somehow gotten Britain to sign an armistice? Now, I know Churchill, and he wasn't going to do that. But what happens if they've taken Egypt? Well, no, Churchill isn't going to do that, because Churchill knows the British people and has the British understanding that Napoleon kicked basically them out of the continent, but they still had, Nelson and his fleet and whatever, and they were going to sail all around and they'll stay at war with you. Okay, well, what if then they take enough submarines and get them out there and sink enough ships that there's actual real starvation and people dying of starvation in Britain? What if they did that? And there was a bombing of all the shipyards, and you weren't building any more ships. And there are some what ifs that Britain decides to, which maybe kicks, the king dismisses Churchill and puts in a new government, and signs an armistice with Germany. Okay, that's a real possible what if. Well, then, if at that point, and say if America hadn't gotten into the war yet because Japan hadn't attacked, America doesn't want to be involved in the European war. There's a perceived peaceful solution in France. Vichy France exists. It's going to get most of its territory back. It's perceived that Britain going to continue to exist, whether it's losing some colonies, particularly in the Mediterranean, to Italy, or not. But it still gets to exist. But it's disarming. It's turning over its fleets. It's sort of doing that kind of thing. And you get peace for 2 or 5 years or something, and then Germany invades the Soviet Union. You can come out with a very different outcome. And so I look at that kind of thing. What if? There are some major what ifs that are reasonable what ifs, including reasonable what ifs with, like I sort of gave a scenario that I could see that the British king and government lose confidence in Churchill and is just too badly off and signs an armistice. They're still being British. The Nazis are still being Nazi. They just were smart and not invaded the Soviet Union while at war with Britain and having, with the possibility of the Americans coming in. The Americans aren't going to come in if Britain isn't at war. It just isn't going to happen. Okay, unless you're doing something super stupid and if Britain's out of the war or something, basically, one fashion or another, and they're starting to sink U.S. ships or something, yeah, you do something stupid enough, you might, but realize Britain and France were still at the war, and it took Germany doing the unrestricted warfare to get them into World War I. If Germany had not done the unrestricted submarine warfare, you would have not had the Americans involved in World War I. Does that mean the Germans would have won the war? Not necessarily, because you're not going to starve off Britain and France. But maybe German armistice might have kept the Kaiser in and kept the German Empire in, being basically the same border. Oh, well, maybe this part, would have changed borders and little bits, but, and there, Poland might have been formed as a block against the Soviets, but it would have been Poland out here, not Poland back in here. So, you could have still lost the war, Germany, and not lost it as badly without the Americans in it, just because the British and the French are too exhausted too. They're just slightly less exhausted than Germany. So that's why Nazi Germany fascinates me. One of the reasons, as you know, I don't like Nazis in Germany, but I study it, is the what ifs in history. Okay, new industrial zone, which of course costs manpower. That's good, and it should, because that means people are working it. Because we're having more factories going, it uses up even more steel and ongoing, as well as simply to build it. So that's all good. And mechanical engineering improves, so those research happens faster that are using mechanical engineering. That is good, and we want that because we researched that. Is there something we need to know? Okay, yes, we want to launch the comment. Polish resistance is rising. Again, another new thing from revolverheld. The Polish armed resistance started to emerge as early as the coordinated German and Soviet invasion. Poland neared completion in 1939. The harsh and brutal policies in German and Soviet occupation zones of Poland motivated many Poles to join the resistance movements and organizations. Despite heavy repression of partisan activities and resistance cells in German and Soviet occupied regions of Poland, the occupation forces did not manage to extinguish the Polish resistance. On the contrary, in spring 1940, the underground resistance movements counted 100,000 members in the general government alone. That's quite a lot. Okay, this is one thing, and there is basically one nation, and one nation only of a occupied people, that has no collaboration forces with Germany, and that is Poland. There basically were no Poles used in German units or in German stuff. And basically I say that is who's defining what? Well, ethnic Germans were definitely conscripted into into German armed forces. Though, and I say ethnic Germans because they may have been living in Poland and had Polish citizenship and papers up until the end of Poland. And some of those people living in some of those zones that are best see it with the revolt risk here, that are in the more traditional cores. Some of these people may have been considered themselves Polish or ethnically Polish, and the Germans considered them German, and so drafted them or whatever. That may have happened. Those types of things happened in this parts of Alsace-Lorraine, parts of occupied France. Some of those people weren't given choices as to what they considered themselves. The Germans considered them German enough to draft into the army, and were drafted in and used, and not created as some sort of French, collaborationist force. German just considered them German and used them. But there was no Polish collaboration units, where there are in basically every other occupied zones, there are collaborationist units of one format or another. And I mean collaborationist units as in guys carrying guns. There was lots of Polish railway workers still working, and other types of things. Oh, and there may be local police type things that may still have guns, but I'm talking about some form of internal security officially of some sort that was gunned. They don't necessarily need to be frontline combat troops, but there basically was none. And it isn't because the Poles resisted and wouldn't be willing to do so. It is because Germany, as part of this general government here, they were erasing Poland. That was a fundamental element, talking earlier in another episode about National Socialist ideology and sort of some of the basis of it. Their National Socialism was going to erase Poland. Now, and it varies from Nazi thinker to Nazi thinker. It wasn't necessarily that they were trying to kill off all Polish people. I'm not trying to say that, like they were the Jews. But there was going to be no Polish identity, Polish government, again, acknowledged basically by the Germans. It just wasn't going to happen. I'm not saying that on some document you might not have a P on it or something, but this was not the general government of Poland. This was just general government. They were erasing the idea that there was going to be a Poland. Now, what was going to happen to the people? Well, maybe get pushed east as Germany goes east. Maybe under some of the thinkers, some of them were going to more or less remain, but be an underclass with German overlords. It varies on what was going to happen. Maybe they were going to die of starvation. I don't know. And it may have been elements of all of those and other things too. But they were erasing the idea of Poland. Now, and I also say this in generally. In territories that have been part of Poland, they raised ethnic Lithuanians. Or not, well, yes, they may have raised ethnic Lithuanians, up here. But also Ukrainians, is what I meant to say, but Lithuanians too as well. So people that may have had Polish documentation, when Poland, or lived within the Polish boundaries before the, whatever, right along here or whatever, before the Soviet invasion, may have been collaborationists, but they were collaborating as if they were Ukrainians or Lithuanians, not as Poles. So Poles were not, except there was no Polish group. And whether some of those individuals that joined some of these other units may have considered themselves Polish or part Polish, that's beyond the point. It's just the idea that Poland was not allowed by Germany to collaborate. And so you get to the point, like I was sort of talking before about the U.S., is that over time, it becomes more and more clear that there is not, like you say with France, there's Vichy France, and especially at the start of Vichy France, basically all of Vichy France is unoccupied. There are a few German inspectors riding around, checking out, counting artillery pieces, and making sure that the French don't have more than they're allowed. And I do know that a lot of the Vichy units that were down, like in Morocco, that were recruiting locals, that had been there since before the war, colonial type troops, were sending back incorrect numbers in that, oh yeah, we have a battalion here that's now the strength of a battalion and a half or 2 battalions, but we're only calling it 1 battalion and we're only reporting that it's 600 men, even though we're now at 800 or 900 men. They were hiding the size and effectiveness of at least the French colonial army, like the Germans were trying to do during the Reichswehr days, hiding the size and effectiveness of the Reichswehr. They were hiding the size and the effectiveness, how many weapons they had in the colonial regions. I just, from reading some articles about this in the past, know that was going on in Morocco. So I'm going to guess, again without hard evidence, they were doing similar sorts of shenanigans inside of Vichy France. Hiding some extra artillery pieces, hiding some few extra tanks that they managed to keep from the Germans and hide away, and claimed that, yeah, we have 1 company here of 3 platoons, but, have an extra platoon, on the books or something like that. And they were doing those kind of things. And that was going on in so that there were German inspectors in the early, I'm talking the early days before the landings of the Allies in North Africa, before the Americans get into the war. Vichy France is more or less in charge. The French are in charge of Vichy France more or less entirely, and there's just a few German inspectors riding around trying to count things. They're not really occupied. As time goes on, to the point of once the American landings are, there is complete and total occupation of the Vichy regions by German forces. Though the Vichy government continues to exist, Pétain is, by that time, really becomes sidelined. He's still officially in charge, but it's Laval who's running the Vichy government. Is a collaborate now is truly a collaborationist government as opposed to an attempt to maintain an independent France. But Frenchmen can look up until that point, could look and see, oh, there's still an independent France, and under the thing, we're going to get Paris back, and well, we might not get everything we've lost. We're going to get a lot of back what we are. So there's reasonable reasons to keep your head down, and this will go over in time. There, if you don't need to be killed, and in time things are going to get better, you're going to wait for them. But if you are sort of getting into the understanding that it's a choice between dying now and dying later, well, you're going to start moving quicker to resistance. Now, you may not want to die on the first day stupidly, but you're going to start building up more and more resistance faction to bide your time and to wait, oh, now they're at war with the Soviet Union. Now it's time to strike and that kind of thing. So, these types of things are going on. Okay, so get partisan resistance, giving the following minimum revolt risk, local partisan, Western Poland. Okay. Western Poland Reserve Regiment, rise up in revolts, industrial capacity. Okay, gain infrastructure level 1. Gain, okay. Well, now that we've occupied this, and I've been saying we got a lot to go through here. Alright, guys, but well, I don't know, sorry, but this episode's going to go long, I guess. Looking at this, okay, so Western Poland rise up and revolt in any and all 0 regiments. Okay, giving L68 given the following effects: minimum revolt risk, local partisan support, gain industrial capacity with level 1 in any and all. Okay, well, infrastructure level 5. Okay, well, let's see what this does. Maybe we should have made sure we had some more occupation troops in some of the cities. Yep. Okay, so as I've known, revolverheld is a better coder than I am. I still think the D-worm is sort of the prettiest coder. Okay. So, keep this in mind. We are, if you like, in loads and okay, revolverheld. Again, I hope you're watching. I would create a, and because this is a beta and I'm taking this beta element seriously. Okay, well, this isn't good. Isn't good. No. Your Western Poland region with the revolt risk doesn't work right or well. I would create a new region, put it in, just create a new region of the area that doesn't have the course. Okay? If you will, where here we have course. Danzig, that was a German city. There is in no way going to be any Polish uprising of any scale or sort. Oh, is there pure cavalry in here? Yeah. Guess not. I'm just going to move faster. No, in Revolver, just let everyone know, revolverheld has very much, even before that, said that he, let's detach. so that he'll work with me to try to solve any problems. Like if something goes really wrong, I can go back to an earlier save and go in and tweak some of this stuff. Really wrong isn't just that I'm saying it shouldn't maybe happen this way. Maybe I don't know if I will. But because I'm not disagreeing, revolverheld, with this sort of happening and the revolt risk going on here. And I'm not trying to, you know, oh, you're making this too hard for me. No, I'm not at all thinking in those terms. I am thinking this is pretty good. But here also revolverheld. Now I'm not saying you're wrong. And I know maybe everyone's not interested in my talk with revolverheld right now. But this minimum revolt risk, I don't like it. Because it doesn't give me the ability to affect it. Now, I can see, because see that minimum is in yellow there. That means on that list, where the rest is in blue or in red. If you want to tack on a level of revolt risk, I'm fine with that. I actually am, and I'm fine with your level of revolt risk. But your minimum is too high, or the idea that there's a minimum, because you already sort of have something of a minimum. Meaning, put on an additional revolt risk. I know we have propaganda press. I know we have Ordnungspolizei, and we have propaganda, and we have give them cake, and we have home front. But we also have that suppression there, and that suppression in this particular province is because of SS and SA and other units. I really think it should be a revolt risk that if we occupy it, we can push it down, we the players. So that is where I would change this to just have Polish revolt risk effect or something like that, and have it add it to this region and have it there and have it stay there. Unless you have some other event that you think it should be removable, but basically have it there and have it stable. But make it so that whether it's the Ordnungspolizei, the SS, the SA, and I've recently read Stormtroopers: A New History, and they talk very much about the SA operating in occupied areas of Poland as well as the general government of Poland. I'm sort of distinguishing the two. The SA were very heavily operating in both the areas, including, especially as the war goes on, more and more forming of SA units in the general government region as a suppressive measure. Now, again, from my reading, most of the personnel were non-full-time in that the SA were the personnel were, had a day job. Again, most they're at certain levels, they were full time. Off certain command and other levels, and some jobs they were full time. But a lot of them they were sort of part time reservists, if you will. I mean, they're full SA. And this again, I've learned a lot more details of some of the SA. There are reserve SA units that I thought were reserved in the part time, and then I thought the rest of the bulk of the SA were full-time. They weren't. The rest of the bulk of the SA were part-time as well. But for some reason, the reserve and the standard, reserve were for the older men, basically. And a lot of the SA people were pushed into the reserve at certain times, partially just aging out. But they're trying to keep the SA to be younger men. The reserve units and regular units, but both of those are part-time. And even a lot of the SA officer types had other jobs, that were like professional jobs that were their primary means of income. But there were full-time SA people. Obviously, at the very top of Victor Lutz, he doesn't have a day job and works part-time as the SA. So it depends on what's going on, but most of the great bulk of the manpower is a part-time, if you will, that may be called up for periods of time to work, full-time, if you will. Like during the invasion of Poland, some of the Sudeten SA units that had been former Freikorps had converted to being part of the SA because of their military training and because they already were military equipped. They were used minimally as combat troops, but also as sort of immediate behind the fronts occupation troops. But they were engaging Polish. In the book that Sudeten SA in Poland without the D or whatever the book's called, that the author does talk about very much, because looks at it, but definitely the author talks that it's a propaganda piece, and I always knew it was, and doesn't disagree with the facts in the book, just disagrees that it's putting it in the best light, shall we say. But and they did contact and shoot at and were shot at by the Polish army, some of these SA, and of course the SA were fighting in Danzig as well. These guys. And so they might be called up for a time period, of maybe weeks or more, to be full-time duties. But they were ongoing for the most part. Most of them were part-time. But they were formed up, different SA units of different sizes, so that they were operating around in the general government, and as well as very much operating in their truly annexed territories. So I would go back in the annexed region, create a general, and you can find a map, and just create and I presume whatever, but create just a zone called general government or whatever, and have the effect only there. Now again, I would have it as something that you could push down, just give it a modification level that you can push down. But if you still think it needs and I can understand why you could think it needs a minimum revolt risk, I can understand that, but it needs to be just in the general government, I think, because they just got rid of the Poles in many of these regions. So if there's a revolt risk, they just got rid of them, by sending them to the general government mostly. Okay, Mussolini meets Hitler on short notice. On the 18th of March 1940, Hitler met Mussolini in his railway carriage in the Brenner Pass, high in the Alps, close to the border between the two countries. The haste in with which the meeting was arranged had led to Mussolini to suppose that Hitler would soon set off the powder keg. In the journey to the meeting, Mussolini tells his foreign minister, Count Ciano. Count Ciano, as I'm learning more about him, really dislikes the German alliance. I would say he's a dedicated fascist, but he is a bit more pro-English, a bit more pro-French, more pro-English, I think, than pro-French. And I'm not saying like he's an Anglophile and thinks English are the greatest or anything like that, but doesn't really necessarily like the Germans much, and very much doesn't want to go to war with the Germans or the French, partially on the grounds that he thinks they're going to lose, and that Germany isn't, they're going to lose, and Germany isn't going, may or may not win the war, if you will, but they're going to lose in the Mediterranean and not do well. It's partially that, but it's also partially he sees it as an unnecessary war, and wants a strong Italy, and like I say, is a fascist, but he very much is trying to keep Mussolini from going to war alongside Hitler, even though he's part of the people that negotiate the Pact of Steel. He's not terribly pleased by it. That the Italians will not join the war until the moment is convenient to them, that they will form a left wing of the offensive, trying to supply troops. The purpose of the rendezvous was to arrange how and when Italy would join the war against Britain and France. Hitler deliberately concealed his intention to invade Denmark and Norway, but laid out his planned invasion of France. General records the meeting in his diary. The conference is more of a monologue than anything else. Hitler talks all the time, but is less agitated than usual. He makes few gestures and speaks in a quiet tone. He looks physically fit. Mussolini listens to him with interest and with deference. He speaks little and confirms his intention to move with Germany. Now, Mussolini, for various reasons, one, wanting to be on the winning side as he thought it was going to be, and wanting to grab up territory, most assuredly some of that. But also, Mussolini does sort of feel that he is sort of Italian national honor. He needs to continue with the pack of steel. Now, remember, Mussolini speaks German to a reasonably good degree, so he's able to sit and listen to Mussolini without an interpreter. I mean, Mussolini's able to sit and listen to Hitler without an interpreter, because Hitler doesn't speak any language but German. And which he's talking about, because we definitely know, times Hitler's haranguing people, basically yelling and shouting and whatever. And we take that to be something like his public speaking stuff, but he makes few gestures and speaks in a quiet tone. There is basically one recording, to the best of my knowledge, one recording of Hitler speaking not in a public address mode of some sort or another. And that was secretly recorded by the Finns when he's up here meeting with Mannerheim. And so if you want to listen to hear what Hitler sounds like conversationally, and to me, I've listened to it. I don't understand the German to understand what he's saying, really, other than maybe catching a word or now and again. But just his tone is very different when he's speaking conversationally. And so I guess that's what's going on and what he's talking about. Okay, Führer Directive number 6. The Führer Directive number 6 was issued on October 7, 1939, requiring the Wehrmacht preparation for an attack in the West. The 12th of November 1939 was set for the launch date, despite Hitler's bombast, Brauchitsch, and Halder. And other generals were convinced this attack would be a disaster, but they don't raise any objections. I'm putting that in. After trying and failing once more to convince Hitler to wait, they mulled over they raise objections, and Hitler overruns them over in the conversation. And this is why Hitler likes Halder and Brauchitsch, because he can browbeat them into doing what he wants, and they just sort of go, oh, okay, whatever, Führer. They're not good leaders for the German army. Neither of them are. Because you need leaders, whether they're right or they're wrong. And had they done some of the Brauchitsch/Halder type plans, they probably would have been wrong, and France may have been able to hold out against the offensive. But, and I say may because there's a lot of ifs in that, but even if they're wrong, you need military people that are willing to go, invading the Soviet Union is stupid and we're going to lose. And the Führer goes, no, we will attack. And then they go, well, we're either not attacking or I'm resigning. You need people like that, because after you fired the top 25 guys in your army, maybe somebody like Hitler's going to realize, if I keep promoting new people in charge of the army and telling them to attack Germany, and they keep saying, no, I'm going to lose all my generals and this won't work. You need people that are willing to say no when they truly believe they're wrong. Now, if you truly ask around among the top leaders of the army, and one guy says no, and all the others say yes, well, then you fire the guy that says no because you think you're right. But if everybody is signaling that they're all going to quit on you if you push forward on this, then you are maybe figure out that you're wrong. Because obviously, in any sort of military action, a bunch of people are going to... Now, some people may say this is not a good idea, but still go along with it. That's fine. But at some point, at some level, people, if they really truly think it's a not the best idea, but something like, if we go to war with the Soviet Union, we're all going to die because they're going to come over and kill us all. You need to be able to stand up and say no. but they weren't. Okay, it was okay the first time considered, but now, okay, I don't know if I'm going to read all this. True Nazi believers, they simply could not be counted on to participate in widespread military anti-coup Hitler. Okay, so let's see. We can give the order, leadership, party ruling, organization. No need. We're not going to do this. No, no need to do this. I don't need land organization up. Okay, the 6th GURBS division. Great, good. And is that on the map? Super long. Yes, cool. And Schroner, who was my corps commander, which I'm going to put him back being my corps commander. And we're going to see if we can find... That guy might be good. Oh, Rengel. Rengel would be good. And you go back to being my corps commander. Yeah, historical generals and their historical places are great, but sometimes we want to do that. Okay, well, we're going to take this opportunity to end the episode here. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you for liking the videos. I really do appreciate that. And, of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. We're moving now. Oh, good, faster moving. Cavalry, get in here and deal with this a little faster. Okay, that's a good path. Cut these guys down. So, yeah. Okay, said enough about that. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.